The day I got the invitation to my daughter's wedding, I sat on the edge of my small bed and read it over and over until the words blurred. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Emily Rose Parker and Nathan James Carter. The handwriting wasn't hers, it was printed, impersonal, distant. There was no note inside, no message, no trace of warmth. Just a date, an address, and the silent reminder that I wasn't part of her world anymore. For 12 years, I had lived with that silence. The kind that seeps into your bones, that reminds you every morning that somewhere out there, your child is growing up without you. I missed her birthdays, her graduations, her laughter echoing down the hallway. But that day when the envelope arrived, I felt something shift inside me. A pull not of obligation, but of love refusing to die quietly. I hadn't been invited out of love. I knew that. Maybe it was pity. Maybe her fiancé convinced her to let me come. Or maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see if I'd even bother showing up after all these years. The past has a cruel way of staying present. Every time I looked at her picture on the mantel, I remembered the night she slammed the door, her eyes red from crying, her voice trembling as she said, "You chose your work over me, Dad. You always have." And maybe she was right. I was a doctor back then, trauma surgeon. My life revolved around the sterile walls of the hospital, the clock that never stopped ticking, the lives that depended on my steady hands. I saved strangers while my own family fell apart. My wife, Laura, had warned me. She told me that Emily needed more of me. But when she passed away suddenly, heart failure at 44, my world collapsed. And Emily blamed me for it all. She left home at 18 and never looked back. Now, as I held that wedding invitation, memories came flooding back like waves that refused to recede. Her first steps on the garden grass. The way she used to call me Papa instead of Dad. Her laughter when I tried to braid her hair before school. And then, the silence that followed for more than a decade. I didn't know if I should go. What would I even say? I'm sorry, felt too small, too late. But not going felt worse. That night, I walked down to the river behind my cottage. The moonlight shimmered across the surface and the air was cold enough to sting my skin. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Laura, what would you do?" I didn't expect an answer. But for the first time in years, I felt something like peace and urging from somewhere deep inside that said, "Go." So I packed my old suit. The same one I wore at Laura's funeral. The one Emily said made me look like a sad movie dad. It still fit, though it hung a little looser around the shoulders now. Age and regret have a way of shrinking a man. The day of the wedding came faster than I expected. The venue was a countryside chapel, white stone walls, ivy curling around the old bell tower. Guests in pastel dresses and dark suits filled the courtyard, smiling, chatting, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I stayed near the back, unnoticed. The music played softly, violins warming the air. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my tie, a nervous habit I never quite broke. Then I saw her. Emily. She was radiant, dressed in ivory silk that caught the sunlight like a whisper. Her hair, chestnut brown like her mother's, was pinned elegantly, with soft curls framing her face. My throat tightened as I realized it was the first time I'd seen her in person since she was 18. She was laughing with her bridesmaids, her smile effortless, untouched by pain. But as she turned, our eyes met. Just for a second, her laughter faltered. There it was, the recognition, the flash of memory, the flicker of everything we never said. She turned away quickly, pretending to adjust her bouquet. My heart ached, but I stayed still. I didn't want to ruin her day. I wasn't even sure she'd let me stay if I went up to her. Then the music shifted, the wedding march began. Everyone turned toward the aisle, but something strange happened. Emily didn't appear on her father's arm. She stood alone at the chapel entrance, her expression unreadable. The guests whispered. A few heads turned toward the back, toward me. My chest tightened. Was she waiting for me? No, it couldn't be. I was just a shadow from her past. And then, from the other side of the aisle, a man stepped forward. Older, steady, wearing a simple suit. The crowd murmured as he offered his arm to her. Her eyes shimmered, and I saw her lips form a name I couldn't hear. But when she looked down the aisle and saw who it was, she froze. Her bouquet trembled. The music faltered, and the chapel fell silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the air inside the chapel seemed to still itself, as though the world was holding its breath. Emily stood at the entrance, her white veil trembling ever so slightly, and the man beside her tall, with silver hair and a calm expression, looked at her as though waiting for permission. It wasn't me, but the shock on her face said it all. Whoever this man was, she hadn't expected him. I could see her lips part, her eyes glisten with a confusion that rippled through the crowd like an invisible wave. The pianist hesitated, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys, and the whispers began soft, curious murmurs darting from row to row. I couldn't hear what Emily said to him, but I saw the way her lips trembled. The man smiled faintly, nodded once, and gently offered his arm again. After a moment, she took it, and together they began to walk down the aisle. Each step she took echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. I knew that walk nervous, graceful, determined. I used to hold her hand when she was little, guiding her across the street, teaching her to take careful steps. But now, she was holding on to someone else. My throat ached, but I stayed in my seat at the very back. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene. This was her day. I was just a spectator in a life that had once been mine. When she reached the altar, the man released her arm, bowed his head slightly to the groom, and stepped aside. Nathan, tall, kind-eyed, with the sort of nervous smile young men wear when they're in love, took her hand and whispered something that made her smile again. The ceremony resumed. The music rose softly, and the officiant began to speak, but I couldn't focus on the words. My eyes kept drifting toward that man. Who was he? Why had Emily reacted that way? I didn't recognize him, but something about him seemed familiar. Then it hit me. 12 years ago, during Laura's funeral, a man had approached me outside the church. He introduced himself as Michael Turner, a neighbor who'd known Laura and Emily for years. He'd offered to help Emily with errands, to check in on her if she ever needed anything. I remembered shaking his hand absently. My head clouded with grief, barely acknowledging him, and now, there he was walking my daughter down the aisle. The realization hit like a quiet storm. He hadn't just been helping out. He'd been there for her all those years when I wasn't. The idea twisted inside me. Equal parts gratitude and shame. As the vows began, I noticed how Emily's voice wavered slightly when she said Nathan's name, but steadied as she spoke about love and forgiveness. Her eyes flickered toward the crowd for just a moment, landing somewhere near the back. I lowered my gaze before she could see me watching. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," the guests erupted into applause. Laughter filled the room again, breaking the tension that had held everyone hostage just moments earlier. I stayed seated while people stood and clapped. My hands wouldn't move. It was like part of me wanted to cheer for her, and another part just wanted to disappear quietly before she saw me. Then, a gentle tap on my shoulder startled me. I turned. It was the man Michael. "Mr. Parker," he said quietly, his voice deep but kind. "It's been a long time," I nodded, unable to find words. "You?" Walked her down the aisle. He looked toward Emily, who was laughing now as her bridesmaids hugged her. "She asked me to," he said simply. "Her mother meant a lot to me. When Laura passed, Emily didn't have many people. I just did what I could." There was no arrogance in his tone. No attempt to make me feel small. Just truth, simple and steady, like the kind that hurts more because it's honest. I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I managed. "For being there," Michael nodded. "She's a good woman, Tom. She's strong like her mother. But she carries pain, too. You should talk to her before you go." The thought terrified me. "I don't think she wants to see me," he smiled faintly. "Then give her the chance to decide that herself." Before I could respond, he excused himself and walked toward the group gathered around Emily. She turned slightly, and for a brief moment her eyes found mine again. This time she didn't look away. Her expression softened, confused, conflicted, but no longer angry. Just searching, I felt my breath catch. Then before I knew it, she began to walk toward me. Slowly, hesitantly, like someone approaching a memory they weren't sure they wanted to relive. The crowd continued laughing, unaware of the invisible current pulling through the back of the chapel. My heart pounded as she stopped just a few feet away. "Dad," she said softly. The word nearly broke me. It was the first time I'd heard her call me that in over a decade. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice trembling between surprise and pain. I swallowed. feeling the weight of all the years between us pressing down on my chest. I almost didn't, I admitted. But I had to see you, even if it was just from the back row. She blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening. I didn't invite you, she whispered, shame flickering across her face. It was Nathan's idea, he said. He said no wedding should happen without family. I nodded slowly. He sounds like a good man. He is, she said quietly. Then, after a pause, I didn't mean to hurt you by asking Michael to walk me down the aisle. I didn't know if you'd come. My voice was barely a whisper. You did what you had to do. I'm just glad someone was there for you when I wasn't. Her lip quivered. You could have been, she said softly. You could have tried. There was no anger in her voice, just sadness. The kind that comes when the years have taken all the fight away, leaving only what's true. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. You're right, I said. And I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I had. She looked at me for a long moment, then stepped forward and did something I didn't expect. She hugged me. It wasn't a long embrace, just a few seconds, but it felt like the world stopped spinning long enough for both of us to breathe again. When she pulled back, she smiled faintly. Stay for the reception, she said. Please. I nodded, unable to speak. As she turned back toward her new husband, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows caught her face. And for the first time since Laura's death, I saw her truly smile, and in that light, I finally felt what forgiveness might look like. The reception took place in the open courtyard behind the chapel, a garden framed with white roses and lanterns strung across wooden beams. Soft music played from a live quartet under a canopy, and the late afternoon sun bathed everything in gold. Guests mingled with champagne glasses in hand, laughter floating in the air like the scent of summer. I stood off to the side near a small fountain, clutching a cup of water I hadn't touched. The sounds around me felt distant, like echoes in a dream. My daughter's laughter, though that cut through everything. Every time I heard it, a piece of my heart came alive again, remembering how that same sound once filled our house. I wanted to approach her, but I didn't want to intrude. She deserved her joy today. I had stolen enough of her time already, then a hand tapped my shoulder. Dr. Parker? I turned to see a young man, maybe in his early 30s, with sandy hair and a camera hanging from his neck. Yes, I said cautiously. He smiled. I'm Daniel Nathan's brother. I heard you're Emily's father. The title still startled me, father. I nodded. That's right. He gestured toward the table under the oak tree. Nathan wanted to make sure you were comfortable. Said he'd be honored if you sat near the family. My chest tightened. That kind of kindness always disarms me. That's very thoughtful, I said quietly. Daniel smiled again. You raised a remarkable woman, sir. She's got a lot of heart. The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't raise her not the woman she'd become. Someone else had. But I smiled politely and thanked him. When I finally gathered the courage to sit near the family table, Emily was already there, her eyes following me as I approached. Nathan was beside her, his arm draped lovingly over her chair. They both stood as I came closer. Dad, Emily said softly, pulling out a chair. Sit with us? Her voice had changed gentler now, less guarded. I nodded, barely trusting my voice, and took the seat beside her. Nathan extended his hand. It's good to finally meet you, sir. His handshake was firm but warm, the kind of grip that told me he meant every word. I studied his face for a moment. There was sincerity in his eyes, a steadiness that reminded me of Laura. You take good care of her, I said quietly. I try to, he replied with a small smile, though, to be honest, she takes better care of me. That made Emily laugh, and it was the kind of laugh that didn't sound rehearsed. It was real, full, and bright. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile, too. The meal began soon after, and I found myself slipping into moments of normalcy I hadn't felt in forever, laughing softly at a guest's story, clapping when the maid of honor toasted the couple. Yet beneath it all was that quiet ache, the knowledge that this moment was borrowed, fragile, and possibly fleeting. During dessert, as the lights dimmed and the first dance began, I excused myself. I didn't want to draw attention or linger too long. The sight of Emily dancing with Nathan, their foreheads touching, her eyes closed, filled me with both pride and heartbreak. I stepped outside the courtyard into the cool evening air. Crickets had started their chorus, and the stars were beginning to appear. I loosened my tie and breathed deeply, letting the night wrap around me. "You're not leaving already, are you?" The voice startled me slightly. It was Michael, the man who had walked Emily down the aisle. He was leaning against a post, his jacket slung over his shoulder, looking as calm as ever. "I figured I'd slip out quietly," I said. "This is her day, not mine." He shook his head, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "You've spent too many years slipping out quietly, Tom." His words struck deep. He joined me, standing beside me as we looked out at the distant glow of the courtyard lights. "You know, Emily never stopped missing you," he said after a moment. "Even when she said she hated you." I turned toward him. "She told you that?" "She told me everything," he said. "Grief has a way of twisting love into anger. She blamed you because it was easier than losing you entirely. But every time she talked about you, I could tell she was still your daughter." I swallowed hard. "I don't deserve her forgiveness." "Maybe not," Michael said gently. "But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about needing to breathe again." For a while, we just stood there, the silence heavy but not unbearable. Then, after a long pause, I asked, "Were you and Laura close?" "Before she passed?" He hesitated, not from guilt, but from respect. "We were friends," he said finally. "She helped me through my divorce, and I tried to help her with Emily. But when she got sick..." "She didn't tell you right away, did she?" I froze. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Laura found out months before she told anyone. She didn't want you to stop working. She thought you'd blame yourself if you couldn't save her. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. She knew?" I whispered. "And she didn't say anything?" Michael nodded quietly. "She was protecting you. She loved you, Tom. She just didn't want you to live with that kind of guilt." The revelation hit like a silent thunderclap. All those years, all that anger at myself for not noticing sooner, for being too buried in my work, and she'd known. She'd carried that secret alone. I sank onto a nearby bench, my hands trembling. All this time, I thought I failed her? Michael put a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't fail her. You just loved her the only way you knew how, through what you could fix. She just wanted you to see that some things don't need fixing. They just need you." His words stayed with me long after he left to join the others. I sat under the starlit sky, the music faint in the distance, and for the first time in over a decade, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for what I'd lost, but for what I still had: a daughter who had given me a second chance, and a wife whose love had stretched farther than death itself. When I finally stood up, Emily was standing in the doorway of the courtyard, her veil gone, her hair loose now. She looked at me with soft eyes that no longer carried anger. "Come dance with me," she said. I hesitated. "Emily, please," she said, smiling gently. "Just one dance, Dad." So I took her hand. And as the soft notes of the music carried through the night, I danced with my daughter under the stars, the same stars her mother once wished upon for us to find our way back to each other. And maybe, finally we had. The music slowed into a quiet waltz, the kind that carries no words, only emotion. Emily's hand rested gently in mine, and for the first time in so many years, I felt the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat through that small, simple touch. The courtyard lights shimmered softly around us, painting her in hues of gold and rose. As we moved, everything else blurred: the chatter of guests, the clinking of glasses, even the laughter in the background. All I could hear was the faint brush of her dress against the ground, and the echo of a time when she was a little girl standing on my shoes, giggling as I led her around our living room, pretending we were in a ballroom. "Do you remember, Dad?" she whispered, as if reading my mind. I smiled faintly. "Of course. You used to complain that I always stepped on your toes." She laughed softly, her eyes glistening. "You did. Every time." We swayed in silence for a moment longer. Then her expression shifted, not cold, but thoughtful. "Mom used to tell me you worked so hard because you wanted to give us the best life. But I didn't understand back then. I just thought you didn't care." My throat tightened. I cared more than anything. I just didn't know how to show it. Every time I saved a patient, I told myself it was for both of you, that the sacrifices meant something. But the truth is, I missed more than I ever gave." She leaned her head gently against my shoulder. "I know," she whispered. "I used to think that if you really loved us, you'd have stayed home more. But when Mom got sick, she told me not to blame you. She said you were saving people because it made you feel less helpless about her. Hearing that nearly brought me to my knees. I blinked back tears and nodded slowly. That sounds like your mother, I said, always understanding more than I did. Emily pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with quiet strength. She was right, you know. You couldn't save her. But she saved you. Even now, she still is. We both smiled through the ache that followed. Around us, other couples joined the dance floor, but it felt like they were miles away. For the first time since Laura's funeral, my daughter and I were together not as strangers, not as two people haunted by what we'd lost, but as a father and daughter learning to love again. As the song came to an end, applause rose gently from the tables. Emily curtsied playfully, and I bowed in return, earning a soft laugh from her and a few guests watching. It felt light, almost normal. Then Nathan walked over, his face glowing with quiet happiness. Mind if I steal her back? He asked with a grin. I nodded, smiling. She's yours now. Emily reached out and touched my arm. I'll always be yours too, Dad. The words settled deep in my chest, a small, fragile gift that would carry me through the rest of my life. I stepped back and watched as Nathan and Emily began to dance, her laughter ringing out again as he spun her under the fairy lights. That sound, it felt like healing. I found a seat near the edge of the courtyard and watched them quietly. Michael joined me a few moments later, a glass of wine in his hand. She looks happy, he said. She does, I agreed, my voice soft. And for the first time in a long while, so do I. He chuckled lightly. You know, Laura once told me that Emily got her strength from you. I turned toward him, surprised. She said that? Yeah, Michael nodded. She said Tom's too stubborn to give up even when he should. She said Emily inherited that same fire. She just had to learn how to use it. I smiled faintly, the corners of my mouth trembling. Laura always saw the good in me that I couldn't see myself. Michael raised his glass slightly. To Laura, he said quietly. I lifted my glass of water and clinked it softly against his. To Laura, I echoed. We both sat there for a while, watching as the night deepened. The lanterns flickered gently in the breeze, and laughter continued to ripple through the courtyard like distant music. It was beautiful, but there was also something deeply humbling about being there, about realizing how easily life could have gone another way. Eventually, Emily and Nathan came over, still hand in hand. Dad, she said, her eyes warm. Nathan and I wanted to ask you something. Nathan nodded. We're leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow morning, but when we get back, we're moving into the old family house, Mom's house. I blinked, startled. The house on Maple Lane? She smiled. Yes, it needs a lot of repairs, but it feels right. Mom would have wanted that, and... She hesitated, glancing at Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. We were hoping you'd help us restore it. Maybe move in, just for a while? For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The house on Maple Lane, the one I'd left behind after Laura's death, unable to bear the silence that filled its rooms. You want me to come back there? I asked softly. Emily nodded. Only if you want to. I don't want to lose you again. Her words trembled, honest and raw. Something inside me finally broke, not from pain, but from the weight of forgiveness I hadn't thought possible. I reached out, cupping her cheek gently like I used to when she was little. You'll never lose me again, Em. Her eyes glistened as she smiled through tears. Nathan placed an arm around her shoulders. Then it's settled, he said warmly. We'll make it a home again, all of us. Michael, who'd been standing quietly nearby, smiled. If you need a hand, you know where to find me. Emily laughed softly. You're not escaping that easily, Michael. You're family now, too. He chuckled, raising his glass again. Then here's to second chances for all of us. As we toasted beneath the stars, I glanced upward, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was speaking to an absence. I felt her there, Laura, watching us, smiling, maybe even laughing softly at how clumsy and human we all still were. And in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes, redemption doesn't come as a grand gesture or a perfect apology. It comes quietly in the hand you hold, the dance you share, the second invitation life offers when you thought you'd missed your chance. The night carried on, soft and endless. And as I watched my daughter radiant, laughing, alive, I knew this was the start of something new. Not perfect, not without pain, but real, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I had in years. The sunlight filtered through the small window of my cottage, but it felt different, warmer somehow, lighter. My hand still carried the faint scent of rose petals from the night before, and my heart. Well, my heart didn't ache the way it used to. It didn't feel whole yet, but it wasn't broken anymore either. I made coffee and sat by the window, staring at the unopened suitcase on the chair. Emily's words replayed in my head. We were hoping you'd help us restore the old house. Maybe move in just for a while? That house had once been the center of my world, white shutters, a porch that creaked when Laura laughed too loud, and a kitchen where Emily used to sit on the counter, legs swinging as she helped her mother bake. After Laura's death, I'd packed my things and left without looking back. I told myself it was too painful to stay, but deep down, I knew it was guilt that drove me away. Now, for the first time, I wanted to go home. I called a cab, and 2 hours later, I was standing in front of that familiar white house. The paint was chipped, the porch sagged, and ivy climbed the sides like the years that had passed us by. But beneath the decay, I could still see traces of the life we once had, laughter echoing in the walls, love lingering in the air. Emily and Nathan were already there, sleeves rolled up, covered in dust and smiles. "Dad," she called, waving from the porch. I waved back, my throat tightening. "You didn't waste any time. Mom used to say if you don't start right away, you'll never start at all," she replied, her eyes gleaming. It was strange how much of Laura I could see in her now, not just in her features, but in the way she carried herself. Gentle, yet unyielding, I climbed the steps, the wood creaking under my weight. "Where do we begin?" Nathan handed me a paint scraper. "The living room walls are begging for help," he said, grinning. And so, we worked. For hours, the house came alive again, the sound of laughter bouncing off the walls, the smell of fresh paint replacing the mustiness of years gone by. Every stroke of the brush, every nail hammered into place felt like a small act of redemption. At one point, Emily brought out a box from the attic. "Look what I found," she said, brushing off the dust. Inside were old family photographs, vacations, birthdays, and candid moments frozen in time. She held up one picture of the three of us sitting on the porch, ice cream dripping down our hands as we laughed. Laura's hair was windblown, her eyes crinkling in that familiar, radiant smile. Emily stared at it for a long moment before handing it to me. "You kept this?" I nodded, my voice soft. "I kept everything," she smiled, and I could tell she understood not just the words, but the years behind them. Later that afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the windows, Nathan found an old record player in the corner. "Does this still work?" he asked, blowing off a layer of dust. I laughed. "Only if it still remembers how to play Sinatra." He chuckled and set a vinyl record on the turntable. After a few crackles, "Fly Me to the Moon" filled the room. Emily looked at me, surprised. "You and Mom used to dance to this, didn't you?" I smiled wistfully. "Every Friday night. Right here in this room." She set down her paintbrush and extended a hand. "Then maybe we should keep the tradition going." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure my heart could handle it. But as I took her hand, the music carried us gently into motion. For a moment, I wasn't an old man covered in dust and regret. I was just a father dancing with his daughter in the house that love built. Nathan watched from the side, smiling before he joined in, wrapping his arms around Emily as the song ended. I stepped back, my chest swelling with pride and something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we sat on the porch together, sipping lemonade that Emily insisted on making just like Mom used to. The air smelled like fresh paint and jasmine, and the quiet between us was no longer heavy, it was comfortable. "Dad," Emily said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "do you ever think Mom can see us?" I looked out at the fading light. "I do," I said softly. "I think she's been watching all along. Every time I've stumbled, every time I've tried to fix what I broke, she's been there, waiting for us to find our way back." Emily smiled faintly, resting her head on my shoulder. "Nathan says that sometimes people don't come back to places, they come back to people." I nodded, my throat tight. "He's a wise man. He reminds me of you," she said quietly. "The good parts." That made me laugh, a real laugh, deep and unguarded. Well, that's the best compliment I've had in a while. As twilight settled around us, fireflies began to flicker across the yard, tiny sparks of life blinking in and out like whispered blessings. Emily pointed toward one that hovered near her hand. Mom used to say fireflies were tiny souls that visit just to make sure we're okay. I smiled. Then I guess we're doing all right. We sat there until the stars filled the sky, not needing words anymore. Just being together, after so many years apart. As the night deepened, I thought of how strange life was, how one wedding invitation, a piece of paper I almost threw away, had brought me back here. Back to my daughter. Back to forgiveness. Back home. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the grand gestures or perfect moments, but the quiet ones, the small, stubborn acts of coming back, again and again, even when it hurts. Because love, when it's real, doesn't vanish. It just waits, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds its way home. The following weeks passed like pages turning in a book I thought I'd finished long ago. Every day at the old house felt like a chance to rewrite the ending not of a story, but of a life. Mornings began with coffee and the scent of sawdust. Nathan would whistle as he sanded the banisters, Emily would hum to whatever song drifted through the kitchen radio, and I'd quietly fix the loose hinges or replace the cracked window panes. It wasn't just work, it was therapy. The rhythm of rebuilding became a kind of prayer. There was a peace to it, a quiet healing that words couldn't reach. One morning, while patching the wall in the upstairs hallway, I noticed faint marks etched into the plaster. Emily's handwriting, barely visible beneath layers of old paint. Emily, age 7. Daddy says I'll be taller than him one day. I ran my hand over the faded words, feeling the sting of memory. I could almost hear her laughter, her little voice demanding I mark her height every few weeks. Those same walls had watched her grow, watched us love, fight, fall apart, and now they were watching us rebuild. Emily came up the stairs, wiping her hands on a rag. I thought you might have left, she said softly. I smiled, turning toward her. Not this time. She leaned against the wall, eyes tracing her old handwriting. I used to come up here after Mom died. I'd put my hand where hers used to be on the wall and pretend she could still hear me. The vulnerability in her voice cracked something open in me. I wish I'd been there for you, I said, my voice low. You shouldn't have had to go through any of that alone. She shook her head gently. We both had to go through it, just separately. We stood there in silence for a long moment, surrounded by ghosts that no longer frightened us. Then, as if the universe was trying to lighten the air, Nathan's voice echoed from downstairs. You two better not be hiding from the work crew. Emily laughed, her eyes glimmering. He thinks we're lazy. I think he's just jealous of our emotional growth, I said dryly. She chuckled, nudging my shoulder. You're getting funnier in your old age. Age has to be good for something, I replied with a grin. By evening, the house felt alive again. The front porch lights worked, the kitchen gleamed, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Emily's doing, of course. Nathan set the table, humming to himself while I poured 3 glasses of iced tea. It was domestic, simple, but in that simplicity lay something sacred. We ate together, sharing stories and laughter. Emily teased Nathan about his paint-splattered jeans, and he retaliated by recalling how she'd managed to trip over a ladder twice in one day. I watched them young, in love, unafraid of the messiness of life, and I saw everything I'd once had, everything I thought I'd lost forever. After dinner, as the dishes clinked softly in the sink, Emily turned to me. Dad, can I show you something? Of course, I said, curious. She led me into what used to be Laura's study. The room was mostly empty now, except for a small wooden box on the desk. I found this in the attic, she said. It's Mom's. I froze. The box was old, I recognized it instantly. Laura's handwriting was carved faintly into the wood. For when the time is right, Emily opened it carefully. Inside were letters, sealed envelopes, yellowed with age. She picked one up and handed it to me. My name was written across the front in Laura's familiar script. My hands trembled. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years. Read it, Emily said softly. She wanted you to. I sat down, heart pounding, and unfolded the letter. My dearest Tom, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything I wanted to in person. I know you'll blame yourself for my illness, you always think you should have done more. But please, stop carrying that burden. I hid it because I wanted you to live, to do what you do best to save lives, even when you couldn't save mine. Promise me one thing. Don't disappear into your work when I'm gone. Emily will need you more than ever. She's stubborn like you, but her heart is good. Be patient with her. Don't let your guilt become her inheritance. And when she gets married one day, promise me you'll walk her down the aisle, if not in person, then in spirit. Love her loudly, Tom. She's the best of both of us. Always yours, Laura. By the time I reached the last line, the ink had blurred beneath my tears. I couldn't speak. The words clung to my throat like they were alive, heavy with forgiveness, love, and everything I'd been too afraid to hear. Emily knelt beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. She knew, she whispered. She knew we'd find our way back. I nodded, unable to form words. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest. She's been guiding us all along. We sat there in silence. The kind that doesn't hurt, the kind that holds you gently. Later, I tucked Laura's letter back into its envelope and placed it inside my jacket pocket. I wanted to keep it close a compass, a reminder of what mattered. Before bed, Emily stood at the doorway of the guest room. Dad? Yes? I'm really glad you came back, I smiled. Me too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. She hesitated for a second. Do you think we can make up for lost time? I met her eyes and said quietly, We already are. When she turned off the light and said goodnight, I sat for a while, listening to the soft creak of the house, our house, as if it were sighing with relief. The ghosts were finally at peace, and for the first time in years, so was I. The next few days were slow, steady, and strangely tender. Every sunrise brought with it the sound of life returning to the house, the kettle whistling in the kitchen, Nathan hammering nails into the porch rail, Emily humming to herself as she swept the floor. The Parker house, once silent and hollow, now had a pulse again. One morning, I found myself in the backyard, trimming the rose bushes Laura had planted 20 years ago. Most of them had wilted from neglect, but a few were still alive, their stems stubbornly holding on. I knelt down, brushing away dead leaves, and thought about how love often survives like that quietly, beneath the surface, waiting for care to make it bloom again. Mom loved these, Emily said, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee. She used to say roses were proof that beauty could come with thorns. I smiled softly. She always had a way of making life sound like poetry. She really did. Emily handed me a mug. I think that's where I get it from. I chuckled. And your temper from me. She laughed, that same musical sound that used to echo through the halls when she was small. Guilty? We sat on the porch steps, sipping our coffee in silence. The air was fresh, filled with the smell of soil and paint. Then Emily spoke quietly. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you ever come back before? I mean, after Mom. Her question wasn't angry, it was gentle, but it still hit like a stone in my chest. I took a slow breath. Because I thought you hated me, I said truthfully. You were so angry that night you left. And I didn't blame you. Every time I tried to write, I didn't know what to say that could make it right. So instead of trying, I stayed silent. It was cowardly. She didn't respond right away. She just looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. I did hate you, she said finally. For a while. But it wasn't the kind of hate that lasts. It was hurt. And missing you at the same time. Her honesty broke something open inside me. I deserved it, I said softly. But I never stopped loving you, Em. Not for a single day. She looked up, her eyes shimmering. I know that now. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A soft wind moved through the trees, and a single rose petal drifted to the ground between us, fragile but beautiful still. After a long pause, Emily smiled faintly. You know, Nathan's been saying we should open up the house again for family gatherings. Maybe have a barbecue next month? I want to fill this place with people again, laughter, food, the smell of grilled corn. I chuckled. You sound just like your mother. She used to host dinners for neighbors she barely knew. She said it made the walls softer, Emily said. That homes need voices to stay alive. She was right, I whispered. Nathan joined us a few minutes later, holding a small box. Hey, look what I found in the garage, he said, setting it down. Inside were a few old keepsakes, an old wristwatch, a faded photo album, and a small wooden train with chipped blue paint. Emily gasped. My toy train. I thought Mom threw this out. I smiled, running a finger along the wood. You wouldn't let anyone touch it. You used to make a whole track across the living room and wouldn't let me walk through until you finished your station. She laughed. That sounds about right. Nathan flipped through the photo album. You guys looked happy back then. We were, I said softly. Even through the chaos we were. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, I never met your wife, sir, but I can feel her here. Like this house, everything about it still carries her warmth. His words settled deep in me. She'd have liked you, I said quietly. You remind me of her in the best ways, calm, patient, and willing to love someone through their walls. He smiled, slipping an arm around Emily. I try. That evening, we decided to light a small fire in the backyard pit. The three of us sat under the stars, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Emily about her college days, Nathan about his awkward proposal, and me about the night Laura and I danced barefoot in the rain. Wait, Emily laughed. Mom actually did that? Oh, she did, I said, smiling at the memory. We were coming home from a movie when the rain started. I tried to pull her inside, but she said, Tom, if you keep waiting for the perfect moment, you'll miss the beautiful ones. And before I knew it, she was dancing right there on the lawn, shoes off, hair soaked. Emily's laughter softened. That sounds like her. Nathan leaned back, gazing at the stars. I think she'd be proud of you both. Silence fell, gentle and peaceful. The kind that holds gratitude rather than grief. I looked up at the night sky vast, endless, and thought about all the years I'd spent trying to fill the void Laura left behind with work, with guilt, with silence. But none of those things ever healed me. It was this sitting by a small fire, surrounded by love and forgiveness that did. Before heading inside, Emily hugged me goodnight. You're staying, right? She asked. I smiled. For as long as you'll have me, she grinned. Then forever. After they went to bed, I lingered on the porch a while longer, the crickets singing in the dark. I looked out across the yard, the roses, the fire dying down to embers, the faint glow from Emily's room, and I realized something quietly profound. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a journey. And healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering differently. Laura's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Promise me you'll walk her down the aisle, if not in person, then in spirit. And maybe in some way I had. Because when Emily saw who walked her down the aisle that day, Michael, the man who'd cared for her when I couldn't, she hadn't fallen silent out of shock or pain. She'd fallen silent because somehow she knew her mother had chosen that moment for her, and that her father had finally come home. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in muted gold. The house was still the kind of stillness that only comes after peace has finally settled into its walls. For the first time in over a decade, I woke not to the hum of hospital machines or the ringing of my phone, but to the sound of quiet laughter drifting faintly from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my bones, but also something lighter in my chest. It wasn't just rest, it was release. When I walked into the kitchen, Emily was already there, barefoot, making pancakes while Nathan stood behind her, teasingly trying to flip one. The air smelled like butter, maple syrup, and joy. Morning, Dad? She said brightly. Morning, sweetheart? I smiled, pulling out a chair. You're up early, she smirked. I could say the same about you. Nathan handed me a plate stacked with pancakes. We figured we'd make breakfast before the painters arrive. Apparently your daughter thinks the living room needs to be happier. It does, she said defensively. The color should feel like a hug, not a hospital wall. I laughed, cutting into the pancake. Your mother would have agreed. She hated beige, Emily said fondly. Said it made her soul sleepy. The three of us sat together, talking and eating, sunlight warming our faces. For a while, it almost felt like Laura was sitting there with us, not as a ghost, but as warmth, laughter, the way Emily's head tilted when she smiled. After breakfast, we tackled the living room. The air filled with the sound of brushes swiping against the walls and the occasional playful bickering. Nathan painted slow and careful strokes, while Emily, impatient and fearless, left bright streaks everywhere. I paused for a moment to take it all in. The room that had once witnessed so much grief now looked brighter, lighter. It was as if the walls themselves had exhaled. When we stopped for lunch, Emily disappeared into the study and came back holding another letter. "This one's for you," she said, handing it to me carefully. "From Mom," I hesitated. "Another one?" She nodded. "There are 3 more in the box. I read mine last night." Her voice softened. "She wrote to both of us." I unfolded the paper slowly. Laura's handwriting was smaller this time, a little shakier, but the words still carried her warmth. "My Tom, if you found this, it means you're home again. I hoped you would be. Do you remember the first night we moved into this house? You carried Emily up the stairs, pretending she was a princess, and then we fell asleep on the floor because the bed hadn't arrived yet. You looked at me and said, 'This place will see everything, laughter, tears, and maybe a miracle or two.' I think you were right. If you're reading this now, then the miracle has happened, not the kind you fix with medicine, but the kind that happens when love refuses to stay buried. I know you've carried guilt, Tom, but it's time to lay it down. Don't spend the rest of your life apologizing for the years you lost. Spend it living the years you still have. Love her. Laugh with her. Be proud again. You always were a good man you just forgot for a while. All my love, always, Laura." By the time I reached the end, my eyes blurred again. Emily's hand rested on my shoulder, steady and warm. "She really knew us," I whispered. "She always did," Emily said softly. "Even now." I folded the letter and tucked it carefully into my pocket beside the first. My heart felt both heavy and light-heavy with memory, light with understanding. The rest of the day passed quietly. We finished painting, shared sandwiches on the porch, and watched clouds roll lazily across the sky. Every moment felt easy, like life was finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. As evening came, Nathan went to pick up dinner, leaving Emily and me alone. She brought out a box from under the porch bench. "I've been meaning to show you this," she said, opening it. Inside were dozens of old home videos labeled in Laura's neat handwriting. Emily's first steps, Christmas '03, the camping trip that went wrong. We plugged in an old projector against the living room wall. The film flickered to life, grainy, warm, filled with the laughter of a time that once felt lost. There she was, Laura, smiling into the camera, holding a 5-year-old Emily in her arms. "Say hi to Daddy," she said, and the little girl waved wildly, her eyes bright. I laughed through tears. "You were always stealing the show." Emily smiled, watching her younger self twirl around in a pink dress. "I remember that day. Mom burned the cookies and blamed you." "She did," I said, laughing. "And I took the blame because she had that look." We watched video after video until the projector light dimmed. It wasn't sadness that lingered when it ended, it was gratitude. Gratitude that those moments still existed, that the love we once had hadn't been erased by time or pain. Emily turned to me, her voice soft. "You know, Dad, I used to think you missed Mom's funeral because you couldn't face her being gone. But I think maybe you couldn't face yourself. She wasn't accusing me. She was understanding me." I nodded slowly. "You're right. I thought if I buried myself in work I could avoid feeling. But all I did was lose everything that made life worth it." She took my hand. "You found your way back." Her words sank deep. "No," I said gently. "We did." That night, as we cleaned up, I caught sight of Laura's photograph on the mantel, the one we'd placed there earlier. She looked radiant in it, her eyes bright, her smile eternal. I whispered, "We're home, Laura." The lights flickered softly just once, as if in answer. Emily laughed quietly. Mom's approving the color. We stood there together, bathed in the soft glow of the room we had rebuilt, surrounded by memories that no longer haunted us but guided us instead. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was living in the shadow of loss. I felt like I was standing in the light of love, the kind that never fades, never breaks, and never really leaves. The days melted into a quiet rhythm, and for once, I welcomed the passing of time. The house that had once symbolized loss now pulsed with life again. Footsteps on wooden floors, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread mixing with sawdust and coffee. Every morning I found something new to fix. Not because it was broken, but because the act of repairing had become my way of healing. Emily started a small garden in the backyard herbs. Tomatoes and a few stubborn sunflowers that refused to grow straight. Nathan built her a little wooden border, calling it the Patch of Second Chances. We laughed, But deep down, I knew that name carried a truth none of us could deny. One evening, as the sky began to glow pink and gold, Emily found me sitting on the porch. Polishing my old stethoscope, she tilted her head. "You still have that?" I nodded. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It's seen more of me than most people have. She smiled softly. "Do you ever miss it?" "The hospital." I thought for a moment, tracing the worn tubing with my thumb. "Sometimes. But I don't miss who I was when I was there, the man who thought saving lives meant forgetting how to live his own." She sat beside me, tucking her knees to her chest. "I used to tell Mom I'd never be like you. I said I'd never get so busy that I forgot to love." Her words were soft, without accusation. I smiled faintly. "And now?" She shrugged. "Now I realize you didn't forget to love. You just didn't know how to show it then. I get that now. Loving people is harder when you're scared of losing them." The truth of it hit me like sunlight through the clouds, sudden. Clear, impossible to ignore. "You've grown into someone your mother would be proud of," I said quietly. "And I think maybe so have I." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad. You came back." Her words lingered in the air, warm and steady. Nathan joined us soon after, carrying 3 cups of tea. "You two look like philosophers on a porch," he teased, handing me a cup. "Philosophers with bad knees," I said, laughing. He grinned. "I'll take that as wisdom earned." As we sat together, the stars began to appear one by one, blinking softly against the darkening sky. The cicadas sang, the fireflies blinked, and for a moment, it felt as though time had paused just to give us this peace. Emily broke the silence first. "Dad, remember Mom's birthday tradition?" I smiled. "The candle on the river?" "Yeah," she said. "Let's do it tonight." Nathan looked confused. "Candle on the river?" "It was her favorite thing," Emily explained. "Every year we'd float a candle down the river behind the house. She said it carried our wishes to where love never dies." I nodded, my throat tightening. "We haven't done that since she passed," Emily finished softly. Without another word, we gathered what we needed, 3 small candles, an old wooden tray, and Laura's photograph. We walked to the edge of the river just as the last light of day faded. The water shimmered, reflecting the first stars above. Emily lit her candle first, holding it carefully. "For Mom," she said. Nathan lit his next. "For family." And then I lit mine. The flame flickered uncertainly before steadying, glowing against the dark water. "For forgiveness," I whispered. We placed the candles gently onto the tray and set it adrift. The current caught it slowly, pulling it away from shore, its light dancing across the ripples. As we watched it float downstream, a quiet peace filled the air, the kind that comes when words are no longer needed. Emily slipped her hand into mine. "You know, for the longest time, I used to wish you'd come back just once, even if it was only to say goodbye properly." I squeezed her hand gently. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I'm glad you came back to stay." I felt the sting of tears but didn't fight them. They weren't the kind born of sorrow, they were the kind that wash away what's left of pain. Nathan wrapped an arm around Emily, pulling her close. Together, we watched as the candles drifted farther until they were just 3 tiny points of light on the horizon, fragile, eternal, beautiful. When they finally disappeared, Emily sighed softly. "Do you think she sees it?" I looked at the place where the light had vanished and smiled. "I think she's been seeing all along." We stood there a little longer, the night air cool against our skin. I felt something settle deep within me, a quiet finality, not of endings, but of acceptance. As we walked back to the house, the old porch light flickered on by itself. Emily laughed. "That's her again," I smiled, "always keeping an eye on us." Inside, the house was warm, glowing softly in the lamplight. The freshly painted walls seemed to hum with life. On the mantel, beside Laura's photo, Emily had placed a small vase filled with roses from the garden, the first ones to bloom since we'd started tending it. I stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The house. The laughter upstairs. The lingering scent of roses. The life that had found its way back to where it belonged. And I realized then this was the miracle Laura had written about. Not something divine or grand, but something profoundly human. Forgiveness that had outlasted time. love that had survived distance, and a family that had found its way home through the cracks of grief. When I went to bed that night, I left my door slightly open, the way I used to when Emily was little, just in case she needed me. But deep down, I knew she didn't anymore. She was whole, and somehow, so was I. The following morning began with rain, soft, steady, cleansing. The kind of rain that doesn't rush but lingers, as if it's trying to remind you that renewal takes time. From my seat by the kitchen window, I watched as droplets raced down the glass, merging and splitting like memories. Emily was upstairs finishing some work for her small floral business, and Nathan was in the garage, hammering something I couldn't quite identify. It was peaceful, simple, and yet, beneath that peace was a quiet pull, a whisper from somewhere deep inside that said, "There's something left undone." After finishing my coffee, I slipped on my jacket and stepped outside. The rain tapped gently against the porch roof, the air cool and earthy. I followed the narrow path through the backyard to the old oak tree by the fence, the one Laura had loved most. Its roots were thick, its branches sprawling like open arms. I hadn't been there since the day we buried a small tin box beneath it, a time capsule Laura had made with Emily when she was a child. She'd told me she wanted to open it, when we all needed a reminder of what love looked like. I knelt down in the wet grass and brushed aside the damp leaves. My fingers found the small marker stone still pressed into the soil, for tomorrow's smiles. It took some effort, but I managed to dig the box out rusted, weathered, but intact. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were a few trinkets, Emily's childhood drawing of the three of us, a friendship bracelet Laura had made, a photo of us at the beach, and a folded piece of paper that immediately caught my eye. It was Laura's handwriting. To whoever opens this, probably one of you three. If you're reading this, it means enough time has passed for hearts to heal and memories to soften. I made this box not to hold treasures, but reminders. Tom, if it's you, please remember that you were never just a doctor. You were a husband who loved deeply, even when you forgot how to show it. You were a father who gave your best, even when it didn't seem like enough. Don't let regret be the language you speak to yourself. Emily, if it's you, my little wildflower, remember that forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave enough to love again without fear. And if it's both of you together, then maybe love really does find its way home. Close this box and put it back where it belongs. Let it rest, the way I hope your hearts have. Mom, I sat there in the rain, letting her words wash through me, the paper trembling in my hands. I could almost hear her voice, calm and kind, with that hint of teasing she used whenever she knew she was right. Emily's voice startled me softly from behind. Dad? She was standing there holding an umbrella, her hair damp from the drizzle. I saw you come out here. What is that? I smiled faintly and handed her the note. She read it slowly, her lips parting slightly as the words sank in. When she finished, she knelt beside me, her eyes glistening. She really thought of everything, didn't she? She always did, I whispered. We sat there together, the rain pattering around us, the letter between us like a bridge between past and present. After a moment, Emily carefully folded it and placed it back in the box. Let's put it back, she said softly, just like she wanted. We buried it again under the oak tree, pressing the soil gently with our hands. When we stood, she took my arm, and for a long time we simply watched the rain fall, not with sadness, but with quiet reverence. As we walked back toward the house, she said, You know what's funny? I used to think this house was haunted. I'd hear creaks at night and imagine Mom walking the halls. I smiled. Maybe she was, Emily laughed softly. Maybe she still is. Back inside, Nathan had lit the fireplace. He looked up and grinned. You two look like you've just had a spiritual experience. In a way, I said, taking off my wet jacket. Your mother-in-law gave me another lecture from beyond the grave. He laughed. That sounds about right. The three of us spent the rest of the day indoors, watching the rain blur the garden outside. Emily worked on new floral arrangements, Nathan played soft guitar tunes by the fire, and I found myself reading one of Laura's old poetry books, aloud, her favorite, The Light Between Us. As I read, Emily leaned her head on Nathan's shoulder. Her eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips, and I realized this was what healing looked like. Not grand gestures, not perfect words. Just presence. Just peace. That night before bed, I went back downstairs one last time. The rain had stopped, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I walked to the mantel, where Laura's photo stood surrounded by roses from Emily's garden. I touched the frame gently. "You were right," I whispered. "Love found its way home." The lamp beside the photo flickered once softly, like a sigh. I smiled. "Good night, Laura." When I turned to go upstairs, I paused in the doorway and looked back at the living room, the warm glow of the fire, the shadows dancing against the freshly painted walls, the faint scent of roses in the air. Everything about it whispered home, and I knew, deep down, that though the years had taken much from us, they had given something greater in return: understanding. Because sometimes, the hardest roads bring you exactly where you're meant to be. And as I climbed the stairs to my room, I carried that truth with me not as a burden, but as a gift from the woman who had loved us into being. The morning after the rain felt like the world had been washed clean. The air was crisp and bright, carrying the scent of wet grass and blooming roses from the garden. Sunlight spilled gently through the windows, illuminating the old house in soft gold. It was one of those mornings that felt like a beginning, quiet, unassuming, yet full of promise. When I stepped into the kitchen, Emily was already there, standing by the window, gazing out at the garden. She turned when she heard my footsteps and smiled. "You're up early," she said, her voice still sleepy but warm. "I think I've forgotten how to sleep in," I replied, chuckling as I poured myself a cup of coffee. She smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, it feels different now. This house. It's like... it's breathing again." I nodded slowly. "Maybe it's not just the house that's breathing again." She tilted her head, her expression softening. "Maybe not." We sat together at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. Nathan joined us a few minutes later, his hair disheveled, a mischievous grin on his face. "Good morning, philosophers," he said, reaching for the toast. Emily rolled her eyes affectionately. "Good morning, Carpenter," he laughed, taking a seat beside her. "Hey, I rebuilt your porch swing yesterday. You're welcome." "That swing was my favorite spot as a kid," Emily said, smiling at him. Then she turned to me. "You used to push me on it for hours, remember?" I laughed softly. "How could I forget? You used to insist I push higher every time until your mom came out and scolded me for trying to launch you into orbit." She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that filled the kitchen like sunlight. She'd always say, "Tom, she's not a kite." We all laughed at that, and for a moment, it felt like Laura was right there sitting across from us, smiling at how her little family had found its way back together. Later that day, Emily and Nathan left to run errands, and I stayed behind, tidying up the study. Dusting the shelves, I found an old photo album tucked between two forgotten books. Its cover was worn, the corners curled. I opened it carefully, and found page after page of our life birthdays, beach trips, Christmas mornings, lazy Sundays. And then, one photograph stopped me. It was a picture of Laura sitting on the porch swing, cradling a baby Emily in her arms. I had taken that picture. I could even remember the moment. The sunlight had caught her hair just right, and she'd looked up at me with that knowing smile, the one that always made me feel like she saw every part of me, even the ones I hid. Beneath the photo in Laura's handwriting were the words, "Love is the act of staying, even when it hurts." I traced the words with my thumb, feeling their truth in my bones. She had stayed through my long nights at work, through loneliness, through illness. And even after she was gone, she was still here, holding us together in ways we couldn't yet understand. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke my thoughts. Emily and Nathan were back. I closed the album gently and placed it on the coffee table. "Dad," Emily called, stepping through the door. "You'll never guess what we found." I smiled. "That's a bold challenge. What is it?" Nathan carried in a wooden chest, old but sturdy, with brass corners. "Estate sale down the road," he said. "The owner said it belonged to a sailor in the 1940s. Thought you might like it, looks antique." I ran a hand over it, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful." Emily grinned. "It reminded me of you, old but still holding strong." I laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." We decided to place the chest near the window in the living room, Right under the photo wall, we'd begun to build pictures of the three of us, of Laura, of the house through the years. It felt right, like it belonged there. As the day wore on, the house filled again with the gentle chaos of living music, chatter, footsteps, laughter. It was strange how quickly life had returned here. Or maybe it had never truly left, maybe it had just been waiting for us to notice. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Nathan went out to finish a few repairs on the porch, and Emily joined him. I stayed inside, sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the last of the light fade. The world outside was drenched in amber quiet, golden, eternal. I picked up Laura's letters from the mantel and reread them slowly. Every word still felt alive, as though she'd written them yesterday. Don't let regret be the language you speak to yourself. That line lingered in my mind long after I closed the letter. I realized then how much time I'd wasted speaking in the language of regret, replaying the past, rewriting the if-onlys. But sitting there surrounded by the home we'd rebuilt and the family I'd almost lost, I understood something. Deeper. Regret had only ever been a bridge and forgiveness, the other side. When Emily and Nathan came back inside, they found me dozing in the chair, the letters still resting in my lap. "Dad," Emily said softly, shaking my shoulder. "Come have dinner." I blinked awake, smiling. "You two made something edible, I hope?" Nathan grinned. "Barely." We ate together under the soft glow of the kitchen light, trading stories and teasing each other the way families do when the weight of the past no longer sits between them. Afterward, Emily reached across the table and took my hand. "You know, I think Mom would have loved this version of us," she said. I smiled, my eyes warm. "I think she does." And I believed it, because in the laughter, the light, and the love that filled that home once more, I could almost hear her whispering softly, "You stayed." The final weeks of summer rolled in quietly, bringing long golden evenings and the smell of ripening fruit from the orchard behind the house. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and deeply familiar: morning coffee on the porch, afternoons spent fixing small things around the house, and nights filled with soft music, gentle conversation, and laughter that never once felt forced. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't chasing time. I was living inside it. Emily and Nathan had decided to host a small gathering at the house, a New Beginnings dinner, Emily called it. Just a few neighbors, friends, and people who had been part of our quiet rebuilding. I helped hang lanterns from the trees, while Nathan set up a long wooden table on the lawn, draped with linen and wildflowers. As the guests arrived, the garden came alive, clinking glasses, soft chatter, the low hum of a guitar playing in the background. I stood at the edge of it all, taking in the scene. Emily glowing under the lantern light, Nathan smiling at her like the world began and ended in her laughter. It struck me then this wasn't just her new chapter, it was mine too. When dinner was served, Emily insisted I sit at the head of the table. "You're the reason we're here," she said. I laughed. "If I remember correctly, I'm the reason we weren't here for a long time," she smiled gently, "and the reason we made it back." I raised my glass. "Then here's to making it back." The guests lifted theirs in return. The sound of glasses clinking under the starlight felt like music. Later that evening, as everyone lingered over dessert, Emily stood up and tapped her spoon against her glass. "I just want to say something," she began, her voice steady but full of feeling. "When we bought this house, I didn't think we were restoring just walls or floors. I think somehow we were restoring us what Mom built, what Dad kept alive in his own way, and what Nathan helped me see again. This home isn't perfect, but neither are we. And maybe that's the point." She turned to me, her eyes soft and shining. "Dad, thank you for coming home." The applause that followed was gentle, warm, human. My throat tightened. I stood slowly, taking a breath before I spoke. "When you lose someone you love," I said, "you think time will dull the ache, but it doesn't. It just changes it. It becomes quieter, deeper, something that lives in the spaces between your breaths. For years, I thought I had to live with that ache alone. But I was wrong. Love doesn't end with goodbye. It just waits for you to remember how to see it again." I looked toward Laura's photo on the nearby table, her smile forever frozen in that familiar warmth. Laura taught me that love is an action, the act of staying, forgiving, rebuilding. And Emily, you taught me that love never runs out of second chances. The crowd was silent, their eyes glistening in the golden light. Then Emily walked over and wrapped her arms around me, whispering against my shoulder, "I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart," I murmured. After the guests left, the three of us stayed outside, sitting beneath the stars. The night was cool, the crickets singing softly in the grass. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his arm draped around Emily. "You two are dangerous together," he teased. "You turn every dinner into a therapy session." Emily laughed. "It's genetic." I smiled, watching the stars shimmer above us. "You know," I said, "your mother used to tell me that stars were just old stories light that keeps traveling even after its source is gone. Maybe that's what love is too." Emily grew quiet, her eyes tracing the constellations. "Then I hope she can see how far her light still travels." "She can," I said softly. "She always could." We sat there in silence for a while, the kind that felt full, not empty. Eventually, Emily and Nathan went inside, leaving me alone beneath the stars. I walked to the edge of the garden, where the roses swayed gently in the breeze. I knelt down, touching one of the blossoms deep red, vibrant, alive. "Laura," I whispered. "You were right. The miracle wasn't saving lives. It was finding our way back to the one we built together." A soft wind brushed through the trees, carrying the faintest scent of jasmine, her favorite. I smiled through the tears that came freely now, not from grief, but from gratitude. When I stood and turned back toward the house, the porch light flickered once, like a heartbeat. Inside, the laughter of my daughter and her husband echoed faintly through the open window. I paused there, watching, listening, feeling the quiet fullness of a life finally mended. And in that moment, I knew this was where I was meant to be. Not as the man who'd failed, but as the man who'd returned. Because love, when it's real, doesn't fade. It bends, it breaks, it rebuilds, and in the end, it always finds its way home. I looked up at the night sky one last time and whispered, "We're okay now, Laura." The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter just for a second, before settling into the kind of stillness that only comes after forgiveness. And as I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me, I realized that the ache I'd carried for 12 long years had finally softened into something else. Not loss, not regret, just love steady, quiet, eternal.